The first day of the new year should have felt like a beginning. Instead, it felt like a bruise. The streets of Seattle were still wet from last night's rain, gray skies pressing low over the city. My apartment building smelled faintly of coffee and fireworks. I was walking back from a delivery, one last freelance project, before I closed my laptop for good on that kind of work when I heard laughter coming from the door across the hall. My sister's laughter. Khloe's voice was unmistakable, high-polished, the kind she'd perfected from years of being adored. I slowed, half curious, half wary. The door was slightly open. Inside, she and her friends were sitting around the coffee table, champagne flutes in hand, a ring light glowing over them like a halo. "I swear," Khloe said, her tone sweet with venom, "my sister still has that trash job. She's 32, single, and calls herself a founder. Please, she freelances for pennies. It's pathetic." The room burst into laughter, a chorus of cruelty that hit sharper than any slap. Someone added, "Maybe she'll design your wedding invitations for exposure." Khloe giggled, brushing her perfect blonde hair over her shoulder. I stood frozen in the hallway, the smell of her perfume drifting out like a ghost. For a second, I thought I might push the door open. Tell her everything, the meetings, the prototype, the secret that would change everything in just a few weeks. But instead, I took a breath, steadied my voice inside my chest, and walked away. My reflection followed me down the hallway windows, calm, smiling. She didn't know that the trash job she mocked would soon make me the youngest billionaire in America. The next morning, the city was washed clean by another storm. I sat by the window watching the drizzle trace lines down the glass. My apartment was small, bare walls, thrifted furniture, and a corner stacked with circuit boards and sketches. A mug of coffee steamed beside my laptop. The screen glowed with the word Aurora in bold electric blue. It was my project, my heartbeat, my promise. Outside, people hurried through puddles, chasing the new year with resolutions. I was chasing something else entirely. The quiet made space for old memories to creep in. The last winter with my father, Henry Hayes. He was an engineer who believed energy should serve people, not just profit. He died when I was 20, leaving behind boxes of unfinished blueprints and one sentence scribbled in his notebook: "Energy belongs to those who dare." It became my North Star. After he passed, Mom sold everything: his workshop, his patents, even the house, and used the money to fund Khloe's business degree. She said I didn't need help because I was too smart to struggle. What she really meant was that I didn't matter as much as her golden child. For years, I stayed quiet. I went to Stanford on scholarships, studied mechanical engineering, and built things nobody believed in, things that failed more often than they worked. When I graduated, recruiters wanted me for stable corporate jobs. I turned them down. Instead, I rented this apartment, bought a used 3D printer, and started building what my father never finished: a self-powered kinetic energy system that could capture motion and convert it to clean energy. At first, it sounded like science fiction. Then it started to work. But the world didn't care. Investors called it cute, professors said it was impractical, and my own family dismissed it as childish. Khloe told everyone I was playing scientist while she built a real career online. That was fine. Let her play star. I preferred shadows. That night, I went back to my workbench. The hum of my soldering iron filled the air. I adjusted a sensor chip, connecting 2 wires until the faint green light blinked alive. The same rhythm pulsed through my veins, steady, defiant. It wasn't much to look at, just a pair of sneakers lined with microsensors, but to me it was proof. Aurora was real. My phone buzzed. A text from Mom: "Happy New Year, sweetheart. Khloe's hosting a charity brunch tomorrow. You should come, it's good networking." I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. Networking. That's what she thought my life needed: an audience. I set the phone face down and focused on the circuit instead. The sensor beeped once, steady and true. Around midnight, I heard laughter echoing again from Khloe's apartment. Music, clinking glasses, the shrill rise of voices, full of self-satisfaction. I wondered if she'd told her friends about me again, her struggling sister who still tinkered with wires. The thought stung, but not the way it used to. I'd stopped needing her approval long ago. The only validation I wanted was data proof that what I was building could outlast all the noise. I leaned back, rubbing my temples, letting exhaustion settle. The glow from the prototype cast a soft light across the room, green and gold, reflecting off the window pane. Outside, fireworks cracked in the distance, their flashes muted by fog. Seattle celebrated. I stayed still, watching the tiny blinking light like a heartbeat. The truth was, I had once envied Khloe. She was everything our mother wanted: charismatic, pretty, perfectly presentable. The golden child who never had to explain herself. But envy fades when purpose grows. My father had told me that once. You'll spend half your life trying to prove yourself, and the other half realizing you never had to. I didn't understand it then. I was starting to now. When I finally went to bed, dawn was breaking. Rain tapped against the window like fingers urging me not to give up. I couldn't sleep. My thoughts kept circling back to Khloe's laughter, the casual cruelty in her voice. There was a time when it would have shattered me. Now it just sharpened my focus. People like her measure worth by applause. People like me build the stage they clap on. By morning, the storm had passed. The sun broke through thin clouds, lighting up the wet streets below. I brewed a fresh cup of coffee, opened my email, and stared at the message that had been sitting unread for hours. Aurora Labs. Patent application approved. The words glowed on screen like prophecy. I laughed softly, pressing a hand to my mouth. For years I'd been the invisible one, the quiet sister, the disappointment. Now I held the seed of something that could change the world. I closed my laptop and looked around the tiny room that had witnessed every tear, every failure, every long night of solder and solder smoke. The air smelled faintly of metal and rain. My fingers traced the edge of the blueprint pinned to the wall. Energy belongs to those who dare. I whispered it aloud, almost like a prayer. Across the hall, Khloe's door opened. Her laughter spilled into the corridor again as she and her friends headed out for brunch, their heels clicking like applause on tile. She glanced my way, her smile bright but empty. "Morning, sis. You working again? You should get out more. It's New Year's." I smiled back. "Maybe next year." She rolled her eyes and walked away, perfume lingering behind her like a signature. I watched her disappear down the hall, then went back inside, closing the door softly behind me. My heart felt strangely calm. I knew something she didn't. At my desk, I opened the Aurora dashboard. Lines of data scrolled across the screen, movement, patterns, energy output, efficiency percentages. Every number confirmed what I already knew: it worked. The sensors weren't just collecting motion, they were generating sustainable energy, clean, renewable, limitless. I saved the report and leaned back in my chair. Through the window, the sun lit the city in pale gold. Cars moved below like veins in a living body. I thought about Khloe's laughter, my mother's disappointment, my father's promise. Everything led here. Every rejection, every insult, every long night, they were all part of the same design. When people laugh at you long enough, you learn to listen differently. You start hearing what they can't: timing, opportunity, purpose. I glanced at the calendar on my wall. January 1st. The year was just beginning, but my story was already halfway written. Soon the headlines would catch up. I shut off the lights, letting the glow from the prototype be the only thing alive in the room. One small pulse of green, steady as a heartbeat. Let them laugh, I thought. Let them think I'm the weak one. Because sometimes silence isn't surrender, it's strategy. And in silence, I'd learned how to build the loudest revenge of all. The rain hadn't stopped when I woke the next morning. It clung to the windows in thin, uneven streaks, distorting the skyline into something hazy, like a memory that wouldn't quite stay still. The world outside was gray and slow, but inside my coffee steamed and my hands moved with purpose. I opened my father's old leather-bound notebook, the one I kept tucked inside a drawer so worn the wood had splintered. Its pages smelled faintly of graphite and oil, and across the first page were his words in blocky handwriting: "Energy belongs to those who dare." Those words had been my compass for 12 years. Every decision, every risk, every lonely night, soldering circuits under flickering light, traced back to that single sentence. But back then, when he first wrote it, I was only 20, and I had no idea how much it would cost to live by it. The memory began, as most of them did, in winter. New Jersey a decade earlier. Snow along the sidewalks, my father's workshop warm with the hum of machines. He was bent over a generator prototype, his hands trembling slightly even then. "You know, Nat," he said without looking up one day, "you'll build something that makes people's lives easier. Maybe something that lights their path when no one else will." I laughed. "You make it sound like a superhero movie." He looked at me then, smile lines cutting deeper into his face. "No, sweetheart. It's called responsibility." That night, he collapsed. I still remember the metallic clang of his wrench hitting the floor, the way his knees buckled before I could reach him. The workshop went dark as the power flickered out. When the paramedics arrived, I followed the flashing red lights through the snow, my boots sinking deep with each step. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and fear. The doctors said it was a stroke. Too much stress, too little rest. He lay in the sterile light, his once strong hands trembling. I sat beside him, clutching his notebook. "Dad," I whispered, "you're going to get better. You'll finish your project." His eyes opened, glassy but alive. His voice came out as a rasp. "Don't waste it, Natalie. Promise me. Do something, so others don't fall." His hand squeezed mine weakly and then loosened. I promised. And when the machines went silent, that promise stayed loud in my head. After the funeral, Mom barely spoke to me. She blamed him for dying with nothing but unfinished dreams. She blamed me for believing in them. Khloe cried during the eulogy but was laughing with friends an hour later, posting selfies in her black dress. I remember standing by the window that night, clutching Dad's notebook, watching snow bury the world in white. That was the night I knew I wouldn't take the safe road everyone wanted for me. I'd take his. Mom sold his workshop 2 weeks later. "We need to move forward," she said, her tone sharp, efficient. She used the money to fund Khloe's degree in marketing. "It's practical," she insisted, "and she has a gift with people. You'll be fine on your own." I didn't argue. What was there to say that my dreams weren't practical, that I wanted to finish what he started? Her eyes would have turned cold, and I was too tired for another argument. The workshop became a parking lot. I took the last box of his blueprints and left home. At Stanford, I threw myself into work. While everyone else spent weekends at parties or internships, I lived in the engineering lab. My professors thought I was too intense. My classmates thought I was strange. "You act like you're saving the world," one guy said, laughing. "Relax, it's just circuits." But I wasn't trying to save the world. I was trying to save his memory and maybe a part of myself too. I became obsessed with the idea of harvesting human motion, turning every step into power. It sounded ridiculous even to me at first, but I couldn't shake it. My dorm room turned into a jungle of wires and duct tape, sneakers torn apart and stitched back together with sensors. My roommate hated it. "It smells like melted plastic in here," she complained. "Can't you just stop?" I didn't. Failure after failure piled up, fried circuits, burned finger sparks that died before they could even glow. But there were small victories too. A flicker of light, a pulse of energy. Each one felt like my father whispering, "Keep going." One night, I called Mom just to hear her voice. Maybe I hoped she'd ask how I was. Instead, she sighed. "You're still doing that nonsense, aren't you, Natalie? You're wasting your degree. Wall Street pays better than fantasy." "I'm not playing, Mom," I said quietly. "I'm building something real." "Well, real doesn't pay the bills," she snapped. Then, after a long pause, she added, "You're just like him." The line went dead. I sat there with the phone pressed to my ear long after the call ended, staring at the half-finished prototype on my desk. Her words should have hurt, but they didn't. They lit something instead. Weeks later, I finally had a breakthrough. The sensors started producing consistent readings, tiny but real. I strapped them to an old pair of running shoes and walked down the corridor. With every step, the graph on my laptop spiked. It worked. The energy loop was alive. I laughed out loud, startling a student passing by. He looked at me like I was crazy, but I didn't care. For the first time since Dad's death, the silence inside me cracked open into something hopeful. The next morning, I printed out the data charts, taped them to my dorm wall, and wrote above them in permanent marker, Aurora. After graduation, recruiters flooded our inboxes with job offers, consulting firms, energy corporations, defense companies. I deleted them all. Instead, I packed my laptop, Dad's notebook, and those same worn-out sneakers, and took a one-way bus to Seattle. The city was cold, crowded, but it felt alive. I rented a small apartment above an old garage, its rent low enough to be suspicious. I didn't care. I set up a folding table, unpacked my tools, and got to work. Every sound, the buzz of fluorescent lights, the rattle of pipes became part of my rhythm. Sometimes late at night I'd hear laughter drifting from nearby apartments, echoes of people who belonged to a world I had stepped out of. I'd sit by the window soldering another wire, whispering to myself, "Stay small now, shine later." A few months and my funds dried up. I lived off instant noodles and determination. When I couldn't afford rent, I took odd freelance jobs designing tiny energy modules for startups who barely paid. Mom didn't know. Khloe didn't ask. Then one morning, I got an email from an old classmate, MIT Energy Conference, Startup Pitch Program. Apply today. I stared at the screen for an hour. The application fee was almost everything I had left. I clicked submit. When the acceptance came 2 weeks later, I nearly cried. I had a chance, a real one. I called Mom, heart pounding. "Mom, I'm presenting at MIT. It's huge." Her reply was flat. "You don't need another science fair ribbon. You need stability." I hung up before she could finish. That night I opened Dad's notebook again. On the last page his handwriting had faded, but I could still make out the words, "Energy belongs to those who dare." I whispered it aloud. The air seemed to pulse around me. That was the moment I decided. If the world thought I was chasing childish dreams, then I would build something so undeniable they'd have to grow up to see it. I stayed up till dawn perfecting my slides, running the data models, building my case. The next day, I bought a cheap blazer from Goodwill and borrowed heels from my neighbor. When I stood in front of the mirror, I didn't see the invisible girl anymore. I saw a woman on the edge of something. The morning light, now in Seattle, felt similar, cold, determined, sharp. I ran my fingers over the old notebook again and closed it carefully. 12 years ago, I promised my father I'd build something that mattered. I didn't know it would cost family dinners, birthdays, and love. I didn't know silence could hurt as much as it could heal. But promises are like seeds. They take time, they demand patience, and they bloom when you least expect. I looked at the prototype on my desk, still blinking green. Somewhere deep inside, I felt it, the faint hum of faith coming back to life. The day would come when my family would see it, when the world would see it. But that day wasn't about revenge. It was about keeping a promise. And promises, I had learned, are stronger than blood. The garage smelled like solder and rain. It was the kind of smell that clung to your clothes, your hair, your lungs, until you couldn't tell where the metal ended and you began. I had been living there for almost a year, surrounded by stacks of wire spools, half-assembled circuit boards, and takeout boxes that had become furniture. Every morning I brewed cheap coffee, tied my hair back, and whispered the same mantra to myself before switching on the fluorescent lights one more day. Seattle was a city of dreamers, and failures both wore the same tired expression. I walked the streets among them, feeling invisible, my mind half here, half inside the sketches in my notebook. Every night I came back to the garage, sat on the cold concrete floor, and stared at my unfinished prototype. Aurora was my entire life compressed into one small blinking promise. The first weeks felt almost holy. I woke early, worked until dawn, convinced that if I just kept pushing, success would come. But success didn't come, it ignored me completely. I sent pitch decks to 20 investors, "Only 3, replied all, with polite rejections. One said, "Your idea sounds like a toy for fitness influencers, not a scalable product." Another wrote, "Interesting concept, but not commercially viable." The third one simply said no. I didn't have time to feel humiliated. The bills stacked higher, the landlord knocked louder, and my meals shrank smaller. I sold my last gold necklace to pay the electric bill. Sometimes when the lights flickered, I wondered if the building was mocking me. The first prototype died in a puff of smoke. The second one never powered on. The third one, Aurora V3 as I named it, almost worked until a short circuit burned through my only set of sensors. I sat on the floor that night, the acrid smell of melted plastic stinging my nose, and laughed. Not the happy kind, the kind that sounds a little like crying. When you've been dismissed long enough, you start narrating your failures out loud, just to make sure someone hears them. "See," I told the empty room, "you were right, this is ridiculous." But somewhere under that exhaustion, a quieter voice whispered, "Not yet." I clung to that voice. Then came Eli Turner. He appeared one gray afternoon when the rain was falling sideways, a thin man in a soaked hoodie holding a paper bag of tools. I thought he was lost. "Are you Natalie Hayes?" he asked, his voice tentative. I nodded slowly. "Who's asking?" he grinned awkwardly. "I'm Eli. Robotics grad student at UW. I saw your open source demo, post the one about kinetic energy harvesting. I wanted to see it myself. You built all this alone." His tone wasn't mocking, it was awe. It startled me. "Mostly," I said. He set his tools down, walked over to the prototype on the table, and crouched beside it. "This could work," he murmured. "You're using the wrong sensor grid, though. These overheat under stress." I crossed my arms, wary. "And you know that because," he looked up smiling, "because I burned 6 of them last semester." That was the start. Eli became my first teammate, though we never made it official. He showed up every day after classes, sleeves rolled up, talking about robotics, algorithms, life, anything but fear. His energy was contagious. "You sure you want to stake your life on this?" he asked once while adjusting a wire. "Yes," I said. "If it saves even one life, it's worth it." We worked through nights, the radio low, the rain steady outside. When we were tired, we lay on the floor among blueprints and laughed about how every genius in history was probably just someone too stubborn to quit. For the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. Still, reality never stopped reminding me how fragile that comfort was. Rent was late. Investors weren't calling. The press started noticing me, not for my innovation but for my persistence. One tech blog ran an article titled, "Seattle's Most Stubborn Founder When Dreams Refuse to Die." They called Aurora idealistic. They called me a symbol of wasted potential. The article spread faster than any of my prototypes ever could. That week, one of my 2 part-time engineers quit. "I can't afford this anymore, Nat," he said, quietly setting his tools down. "My parents are right. It's time to get a real job." I didn't stop him. I watched him leave, the sound of his footsteps fading into the rain. Eli stayed. Some nights we worked until our hands cramped. Some nights we sat in silence, watching the sensor blink weakly, wondering if it would ever matter. He once caught me staring at it, my face unreadable. "You ever think about giving up?" he asked softly. "Every day," I said. Then I remember how it feels when people laugh. And I realize I'd rather be laughed at for trying than applauded for nothing. He nodded. "Fair. But when you win, make sure you laugh last." That became our joke, laugh last. By late autumn, Aurora the 5th was ready for its first real test. We set it on the floor, connected it to the laptop, and watched numbers scroll. Each step I took sent a pulse through the graph. The line spiked, fell, rose again. Real energy. Real proof. I screamed so loudly that Eli almost dropped his screwdriver. "It's alive!" I shouted, jumping up and down like a kid. He laughed, clapping his hands. "Well, you've officially invented the world's most dramatic shoe." We stayed up all night documenting the results, compiling data, drafting a new investor deck. For the first time, the future didn't feel like a cliff, it felt like a door. But doors don't open easily. I booked a pitch meeting with one of Seattle's top venture firms, Hartman and Lee Capital. I spent 2 sleepless nights rehearsing. The morning of the meeting, I wore the same thrifted blazer I'd worn to my graduation. The receptionist barely looked up as I entered the glass building that smelled like money. Inside the boardroom, the partners sat lined up behind gleaming laptops. I presented for 20 minutes data vision impact. When I finished, the oldest one leaned back in his chair, smiling thinly. "Smart shoes," he said, tapping his pen. "Miss Hayes, this sounds like a Walmart gadget." "Why would anyone pay millions for that?" I straightened my shoulders. "Because it prevents falls. It detects early signs of Parkinson's. It can save lives," he chuckled. "1 patient, maybe?" "That's not a market." The others laughed softly. Someone shut their laptop with a click. I gathered my slides and walked out before they could say another word. Outside, the cold wind hit harder than usual. My breath came out white and shaky. Eli was waiting by the curb. He didn't ask how it went. He didn't have to. We went back to the garage silent. I turned on the soldering iron, the hiss filling the air. He finally said they'll regret it. I smiled weakly. They already do. They just don't know yet. The next week, a small tech magazine published an article titled "Aurora Labs When Passion Outruns Logic." They called me delusional. Twitter picked it up. People joked about the shoe that saves the world. Even some of my classmates joined in. I didn't fight back. I just worked. One night, exhaustion caught up to me. I collapsed onto the floor, my head against a pile of papers. When I woke up hours later, the prototype was still on the bench, its light blinking steadily. Proof that something in this room refused to die. I sat up staring at it, the taste of metal and resolve on my tongue. "We're not done," I whispered. From that day forward, I stopped asking for approval. I stopped waiting for validation. The only thing that mattered was the next test, the next line of code, the next fraction of improvement. Outside, the world celebrated people like my sister, the ones with perfect smiles and easy wins. But I'd learned that real success isn't a celebration, it's a survival. When the rain hit the roof that night, it sounded like applause, quiet, distant, but mine. I looked at the prototype, now shining brighter than ever. Somewhere deep inside, I felt the faint shift of balance, the smallest beginning of something that would one day change everything. For now, though, I stayed in the shadows, soldering in silence. Because someday the world would hear this silence roar. The first invitation came in the middle of a storm. I was half asleep on the couch, my laptop still glowing with code, when my phone buzzed beside me. The subject line read, "Aurora Labs Invitation to MIT Innovation Summit." I sat up so fast the blanket fell to the floor. For a moment I just stared at the screen, the words blurring from the lack of sleep. This was it, the chance I had been waiting for. The same school where my father once dreamed of presenting his ideas was now calling me to showcase mine. I reread the email 3 times, making sure it wasn't a prank. "Selected startups will pitch their products to investors, partners, and the press," it said. My heart thudded. The date was only 3 weeks away. I could already imagine it, the lights, the crowd, the possibility of someone finally listening. Eli came by that morning, carrying a box of spare sensors. I shoved my phone toward him, unable to speak. He scanned the screen, his eyes widening. "MIT, are you serious?" "Nat, this is huge." I smiled, the excitement almost painful. "If we nail this, we might finally get funding." He grinned. "Then we better make sure Aurora doesn't blow up on stage." The next days blurred into each other, work, coffee, no sleep. The garage transformed into a battlefield of cables, wires, and caffeine. We rebuilt the prototype from scratch, testing every joint, every sensor, every data stream. Sometimes it felt like the universe was conspiring to stop us. Circuits, fried parts arrived late. My soldering iron gave out mid-process. But each failure, only sharpened my determination. On the third night, I found Eli asleep at the desk, head on his arms, a half-eaten sandwich by his elbow. I pulled a blanket over him and whispered, "You've done enough." He murmured something in his sleep. Laugh last, and I smiled. When the day of the flight came, I wore my best clothes, a navy dress I'd borrowed from my neighbor and heels that didn't fit. Eli teased me, "You look like a CEO already. Let's hope I sound like one," I said. The plane landed in Boston under heavy clouds. The city felt colder than I remembered, steel and history in equal measure. I could almost feel my father's presence there, like he was walking beside me. The night before the summit, I barely slept. I stared at the city lights outside the hotel window, whispering, "Tomorrow everything changes." The conference hall the next morning was enormous white lights, rows of investors, reporters, and innovators in sharp suits. My hands shook as I pinned the Aurora logo to my blazer. Eli squeezed my shoulder. "You've got this," he said. When they called my name, the world tilted. I walked onto the stage, heart-hammering lights blinding my eyes. A panel of 5 investors sat in front, stone-faced. Behind them, a crowd of hundreds waited. I started my pitch. "Good morning, my name is Natalie Hayes, and this," I lifted the sleek black sneakers, "is Aurora. A system that captures human motion and turns it into sustainable energy. Every step, every movement becomes power." The slides lit up behind me, showing graphs, early tests, and success stories from pilot users. For a few minutes, everything felt perfect. I could almost hear my father whispering, "Energy belongs to those who dare." But then one of the investors interrupted. "Miss Hayes, how do you expect to scale this? Footwear isn't exactly an untapped market." "I understand," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "But Aurora isn't just footwear. It's wearable energy. Hospitals, elder care, even remote communities can benefit." He cut me off again. "Hospitals, are you implying these shoes will diagnose diseases too?" Laughter rippled through the audience. My throat tightened. Another investor leaned back, smirking. "It's a noble dream, but dreams don't pay dividends." The words stung sharp and cold. I glanced at Eli, who sat in the front row, his jaw clenched. I finished my presentation anyway, voice cracking near the end. The applause was polite, mechanical. I walked off stage, my legs trembling. In the hallway, I leaned against the wall, pressing my hands to my face. Eli appeared a moment later, his voice low. "They didn't deserve that pitch, Nat. You were brilliant." I shook my head. "Brilliant doesn't pay rent," he sighed, looking at the floor. "Neither does giving up." That night back at the hotel, I couldn't stop replaying the laughter in my head. The way they dismissed me so easily, as if all my years of work were a joke. I wanted to cry, but anger burned hotter than tears. I remembered my sister's voice calling my job trash, my mother's sighs about real careers. Maybe they were all right. Maybe I was the fool still chasing ghosts. Then, just before midnight, an email pinged on my phone. Unknown sender. I almost ignored it, but the subject caught my eye. "Aurora saved my father." The message came from a woman named Hannah Pierce in Ohio. Her father had been testing an early prototype through a volunteer program we'd set up months earlier. Yesterday, he nearly fell while gardening. The sensors warned him in time. "Doctors diagnosed early Parkinson's. Because of your shoes, he's safe." I read the email 3 times, tears finally breaking loose. Eli knocked on the door, still awake. I handed him the phone without saying a word. He read it, smiled softly, and whispered, "There's your proof." The next morning, I printed Hannah's message and taped it to the wall of the garage when we got home. It stayed there right above my desk. Every time the doubt crept back, I looked at it. For weeks, it became our fuel. We worked harder than ever, improving the design, refining the data. We had no funding, no endorsements, just that one letter. But it was enough. Still, reality had its claws. The landlord raised rent. My mother called again, her tone heavy with rehearsed concern. "I saw a video from that summit," she said. "People were laughing." "Maybe it's time to come home, Natalie." I bit my lip. "Home," I echoed. "You mean the place you sold to pay for Khloe's degree?" She went silent. "I'm fine, Mom," I said finally. "You don't have to worry about me anymore." The line clicked dead. That night, I sat in the garage, long after Eli left, the air thick with exhaustion. Outside rain battered the roof. I opened my father's notebook again. The pages were spotted with oil and fingerprints, his sketches fading but alive. The words stared back at me. "Don't waste it, Natalie. Do something so others don't fall." I pressed my fingers to the ink. "I'm trying," I whispered. "I really am." In the dim light, the prototype's pulse reflected on the wall like a heartbeat. I didn't know it yet, but that letter from Hannah would become the spark that kept Aurora alive when everything else was collapsing. It was the proof of purpose, the kind that no investor, no critic, no golden child could ever erase. The storm outside roared louder, but inside the sound was steady, the hum of creation, the stubborn rhythm of survival. I took a breath, wiped my face, and whispered into the empty room. "They can laugh. I'll build." The next morning, the sun broke through the gray for the first time in weeks. Light flooded the garage, hitting the wall where Hannah's letter hung. The words seemed to glow. That's when I knew. I didn't need applause. I needed momentum. And momentum, once it starts, doesn't stop for anyone. Summer arrived quietly that year, like the city had forgotten to notice. The air in Seattle grew heavy, filled with the scent of rain and asphalt, and my garage buzzed from sunrise to midnight. Aurora had survived its first round of humiliation, and somehow so had I. The letter from Hannah Pierce was still taped to the wall edges, curling from the damp. Every time exhaustion crept close, I'd glance at her words, "You saved my father." That single sentence was enough to keep my hands moving. By June, we'd improved the design. The new sensors were lighter, faster, able to capture data from each subtle motion. The prototype didn't just detect falls anymore, it predicted them. Eli and I called it Aurora V5. We worked day and night, our laughter echoing off the concrete walls, powered by caffeine and stubbornness. It wasn't glamorous. The coffee maker broke twice. The floor was covered with wires that tried to kill us daily. But for the first time, the dream didn't feel fragile. It felt alive. One afternoon, as I was calibrating the sensors, Eli walked in holding 2 slices of pizza. "Lunch for champions," he said, handing me one. I smirked. "You mean survivors." He sat beside me, chewing thoughtfully. "Do you ever think about what happens if this actually works? Like, what comes next?" I shrugged. "Honestly, I'm just trying to make it to next week." He laughed softly. Typical Natalie Hayes answer. We both knew the truth. If Aurora worked, it wouldn't just save lives. It would change mine. A week later, the opportunity came without warning. A tech journalist from a local business magazine emailed me asking for an interview. "We've heard about your miracle shoes. Mind if we stop by the lab?" I stared at the screen for a long minute, torn between excitement and dread. Publicity could mean investors, but it could also mean scrutiny. Still, we needed attention. I wrote back yes. The reporter, a woman named Lila Grant, arrived the next day. She was young, sharp, and wore an expression that said she'd seen too many dreamers fail. Her photographer followed close behind. "So this is where the magic happens," she said, looking around the cramped garage. "This is where the noise becomes purpose," I replied. She smiled faintly, jotting something in her notebook. "Tell me, Natalie, what makes you believe Aurora will work when so many similar startups have failed?" I paused. "Because failure doesn't mean broken, it means data. Every time something doesn't work, it tells me how to make it better." The photographer snapped a picture just then, me, standing under the single hanging bulb holding the black sneakers glowing faintly green from the embedded lights. The moment looked poetic, but inside I was terrified. 2 weeks later, the article came out. The headline read, "The Woman Who Thinks Shoes Can Save the World." It wasn't meant to be flattering. The tone was skeptical, playful, even mocking in places. But the photo, me holding the sneakers' eyes, fierce, spread online faster than the words. People started sharing it, some with laughter, some with admiration. For the first time, Aurora wasn't invisible, and neither was I. Emails started coming in: small investors, local health groups, tech enthusiasts. A few wanted to test the shoes for relatives with Parkinson's. I said yes to all of them. Each test mattered more than any promise of funding. But as attention grew, so did pressure. The data servers crashed twice in 1 week. Eli barely slept. I burned through my savings to replace parts. At night, the garage filled with the low hum of exhaustion. Still, I kept repeating the same words my father had once told me: energy belongs to those who dare. Then came the call from home. I was tightening a wire when my phone buzzed. Mom's voice came through, clipped and disapproving. "I saw your picture in the paper," she said. "You look tired. You should think about getting a real job before you embarrass yourself." I felt my chest tighten. "It's not a joke, Mom. Aurora is helping people," she sighed. "Helping Natalie, please." "You're wasting your time. Khloe's firm just closed its biggest deal of the year. That's success." Of course she mentioned Khloe. She always did. My younger sister, the golden child. The one who never failed publicly. I forced my tone steady. "I'm happy for her," I said. "Well, Mom," replied her voice, softening just enough to sting, "we can't all be dreamers." When the call ended, I stood there, staring at the wall until the silence turned heavy. Eli found me like that. "Bad news?" he asked. "Family?" I said. "They still think I'm playing," he smiled sadly. "Then we'll make it impossible for them to ignore you." That became our mission. By late summer, the data from our field tests looked incredible. Early Parkinson's detection accuracy had doubled. Hospitals began to show interest. I could almost feel the tide turning. Until the night, everything caught fire, figuratively and almost literally. We were testing the newest prototype when one of the power converters overheated. The room filled with the smell of smoke. Eli yanked the power cord while I grabbed the fire extinguisher. When the hiss cleared, the prototype lay blackened on the table. We stood there, panting, faces streaked with soot. Eli broke the silence. "We might have to rebuild from scratch." I wiped sweat from my forehead. "Then we rebuild. Again." He looked at me, eyes shining with exhaustion. "Do you ever stop?" "No," I said quietly. "Because if I stop, they win." He didn't ask who they were. He didn't have to. The next morning, the magazine that had mocked me published a follow-up. This time, the tone had shifted. Aurora Labs shows promise after early trials. Investors began reaching out again, hesitant, cautious, but curious. One of them was a venture firm from New York, Kensington Ventures. The same firm that had once ignored my emails now wanted a meeting. When I told Mom, she laughed softly. "You're meeting real investors. Well, maybe you're growing up after all." "I'm not growing up," I said. "I'm proving you wrong." That silenced her. The meeting was scheduled for mid-September. For a week, I practiced every line, every data point, every projection. Eli helped me refine the pitch deck until it gleamed. The day arrived bright and sharp. I wore the same navy dress, but this time I felt different. Stronger. The glass doors of Kensington Ventures reflected my face, older, calmer, unafraid. Inside, the boardroom buzzed with quiet energy. The partners listened, asked questions, took notes. When I finished, the lead investor, a woman named Victoria Lee, smiled faintly. "Ms. Hayes, this is one of the most disciplined prototypes we've seen this year. We're interested, but we'll need due diligence." It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no. It was hope. Eli and I walked out into the afternoon sun, dazed. So he said, "Are you ready for this?" I smiled, my throat tight with emotion. "I've been ready since the day they called it stupid." We celebrated with takeout noodles and cheap champagne in paper cups. For the first time, I allowed myself to believe the worst was over. That night before sleeping, I looked again at Hannah's letter. The ink had faded slightly, but the meaning hadn't. I pressed my palm to it, whispering, "We're close now." Outside, the city lights shimmered like constellations. Somewhere across the country, my mother was probably bragging about Khloe's promotion. That was fine. Let her. Soon she'd have to remember my name too. I didn't want revenge. Not yet. What I wanted was proof that the promise I made to my father was worth every sacrifice. The hum of the machines filled the garage again, steady and familiar. I turned off the lights, watching the glow of the new Aurora prototype pulse in the dark. It blinked once, twice, then settled into a rhythm. Like a heartbeat, like mine. Tomorrow would bring more battles, more laughter, more doubt. But tonight I let myself whisper the words that had carried me this far. They called it trash once. One day, it'll power the world. Autumn came early that year, brushing the city with a chill that slipped through the cracks of the garage door. The air smelled of wet concrete and burned circuits. I had spent the last few weeks living in a haze of caffeine, hope, and fear. Kensington Ventures had promised a second meeting, a due diligence session. They called it a chance for their analysts to verify Aurora's potential. If we passed, it meant funding. If we failed, it meant the end. Every day felt like a test. Eli handled the software calibration while I obsessed over the hardware. We rebuilt everything cleaner, wiring faster data transmission, stronger batteries. I barely slept running diagnostics through the night. My hands were blistered, my eyes constantly stinging from the fumes of solder. But exhaustion felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. One morning I found Eli asleep at the workbench, face pressed to his notebook. I draped a jacket over his shoulders and looked around the garage. The walls were lined with sketches, equations, newspaper clippings. On one corner, Hannah's letter still hung, the paper yellowed at the edges. I reached out and touched it gently. "We're not done yet," I whispered. By late September, Kensington confirmed the meeting. They wanted us to present to the board in New York. The email ended with a polite line. "Please prepare a summary of Aurora's financial sustainability and intellectual property documentation." I had never been to New York. The idea of presenting in a room full of people who probably owned more in wristwatches than I'd earned in a lifetime made my stomach twist. But I said yes. I had to. We took the earliest flight we could afford. Middle seats, shared earbuds, too little legroom. Eli was buzzing with nerves. "You realize," he said, tapping his laptop, "this could be the moment everything changes." I looked out the window at the clouds below. "It already has," I said. The city hit me like a current the moment we landed, louder, faster, shinier than Seattle. Skyscrapers glistened like mirrors of ambition. As we walked to the cab, I caught sight of my reflection in one of those glass towers, dark circles under my eyes, hair tied messily back, the kind of face that looked like it hadn't stopped running for years. I almost didn't recognize her. Kensington's office was everything I imagined: marble floors, glass walls, a view that looked down on the city like a god. The boardroom smelled of money and power. I tried not to show how out of place I felt. Victoria Lee greeted us personally. Her presence filled the room, elegant, composed, her tone as smooth as glass. "Miss Hayes," she said, shaking my hand, "I've read your file. I'm impressed by your resilience." "Resilience," I repeated, smiling faintly. "That's one word for it." For 2 hours we presented everything: data charts, user testimonials. I spoke about Aurora's purpose, about fall prevention, about transforming movement into energy. The analysts asked questions, sharp and relentless. At one point, one of them leaned forward. "You've turned down several acquisition offers from smaller firms already," he said. Why? I hesitated. "Because Aurora isn't just a product. It's a promise." The room went quiet for a moment. Victoria smiled, a small knowing curve of her lips. That's what I wanted to hear. When the meeting ended, she said they'd contact us soon. I exhaled for what felt like the first time all day. Eli and I stepped into the elevator, giddy, terrified, alive. Outside, the afternoon sun hit the buildings, turning everything gold. We found a cafe nearby, ordered the cheapest sandwiches, and sat in silence for a while, just staring out at the city. Then Eli lifted his cup. "To Aurora," he said. "To survival." "To silence," I added. "Because that's where all this began." The next few days were a blur of waiting. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart raced. When the call finally came, I almost didn't answer. It was Victoria, wherein she said, Kensington Ventures is offering full investment, $15 million. Congratulations, Miss Hayes. You've built something extraordinary. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My knees went weak. Eli was beside me, mouthing. What did she say? I whispered. We got it, he shouted so loud the entire block heard. We spent that night in the garage with cheap champagne and takeout noodles. The celebration felt surreal. The walls that had once held our failures now glowed with possibility. The next morning I stood outside staring at the sunrise and felt something I hadn't in years: freedom. But freedom comes with shadows. The more success brushed against me, the more the ghosts of my past seemed to stir. Mom called for the first time in months. I saw the news, she said. $15 million, Natalie, that's unbelievable. Her tone was light, but I could hear the calculation underneath. Yes, I said quietly. It's real. I always knew you'd do something special, she continued. You got that drive from me, you know. I smiled, though she couldn't see it. Sure, Mom. Khloe's thrilled for you, she added quickly. You should call her. She wants to celebrate. Celebrate. The same sister who had mocked me, who told the world I was a failure. My chest tightened. Maybe later, I said. But later never came. The first public press release hit a week later. Kensington Ventures invests $15 million in Aurora Labs. My name was suddenly everywhere: tech journals, business blogs, local news. Photos from that interview months earlier resurfaced. The same picture the media once used to mock me now appeared under the headline, "The Woman Who Dared to Build." The phone never stopped ringing. Emails flooded in partnerships, collaborations, speaking invitations. I should have felt elated. Instead, I felt hollow. The noise was deafening, and the quiet I'd once clung to was gone. One night, after another long day of press calls, I sat in the garage alone. Eli had gone home. The hum of machines surrounded me, familiar and grounding. I picked up my father's notebook and traced the faded words again. Energy belongs to those who dare. He would have been proud, I thought. Then again, maybe not, of what came next. A week after the announcement, Khloe posted a photo on Instagram, proud of my brilliant sister Natalie, CEO of Aurora Labs. Always knew she'd make it. The caption was sweet, the comments endless. But what none of them knew was that Khloe hadn't called me once. She hadn't texted. She hadn't even said the words herself. Mom called again the next day. You should post something with her, she said. It looks good for the family. The family. The same one that once sold my father's workshop that left me to fight alone. I bit my tongue. I'll think about it, I said. After the call, I threw my phone onto the table and pressed my palms against my eyes. The pressure built behind them, a pulse of anger, exhaustion, disbelief. Success was supposed to fix things. Instead, it exposed them. That night, I walked along the waterfront, the wind sharp against my skin. Across the bay, the city lights shimmered, like a constellation of promises, some real, most false. I remembered every laugh, every doubt, every time someone told me I was wasting my life. And for the first time I realized success didn't erase humiliation, it only reframed it. When I got back, Eli was waiting in the garage, surrounded by open boxes of new equipment. Look, he said, holding up a freshly printed Aurora tag. They're calling us pioneers now. I smiled faintly. Pioneers get shot first, he chuckled. Then we better keep running. We worked until dawn designing Aurora the 5.6, the model that would go to production. Outside, the city kept sleeping, unaware of the storm that was slowly gathering behind the shine. Because in every rise there's always someone waiting for the fall. And I had no idea mine was already being planned. The first sign of trouble didn't come from the investors, it came from home. It was a chilly November morning when I opened my inbox and saw the subject line that made my stomach drop: family feature request, Khloe Hayes PR. For a few seconds I thought I was hallucinating. Then I read the message. Hi, Natalie. It began in that polished tone my sister always used when she wanted something. My agency is producing a holiday special on inspiring women. I'd love to include Aurora and your story. Think of it as a family moment, good press for you, positive branding for me. Win-win. I sat frozen reading it twice. The same sister who once laughed about my trash job now wanted to use my company for content. I closed the laptop and stared at the blinking cursor on the blank reply window. My fingers hovered above the keys, but I couldn't bring myself to type a single word. Eli walked in with coffee, noticing my expression. "What's wrong? Khloe wants to feature me," I said, the word dripping with bitterness. "She's making some holiday PR stunt, family redemption story." He raised an eyebrow. "You going to do it?" "I don't know," I said. "But something tells me it's not for me, it's for her." He nodded slowly. "Then do it on your terms, not hers." The invitation lingered in my mind all week. Mom called soon after, pretending not to know about it. "Your sister mentioned something about filming in Boston," she said. "You should say yes, Natalie. It would mean a lot to the family. The family cared about me when I asked quietly." She hesitated, her voice softening. "You know I've made mistakes, but this could be a chance to show unity." Unity. That word had always felt like a lie in our house. Still, something inside me wanted to face them, to stand in the same room where I was once invisible and let them see what I'd become. "Fine," I said. "I'll come." When the day arrived, the studio was draped in gold lights and garlands. Christmas decorations glittered along every wall. Khloe's crew moved like clockwork, stylists, camera operators, makeup artists, all working under her crisp direction. She looked radiant, of course, dressed in winter white, her hair shining under the studio lights. When she saw me, her smile widened, perfect and practiced. "Nat, you look professional." "Thanks," I said, adjusting my blazer. "You look like a snow commercial." She laughed, that careful, camera-ready laugh. "Come on, lighten up. This is going to be good exposure for both of us." I followed her through the set. Every camera pointed toward her, every assistant hung on her cues. It was like stepping into her world, one built on angles and filters. I felt like an intruder, not a guest. The interview started smoothly. Khloe talked about sisterhood, about how proud she was of me, how Aurora was a beacon of female empowerment. She made it sound like she'd been my mentor, not my critic. I sat beside her, smiling politely, counting the seconds. Then came the question that shifted everything. The host, a woman with too perfect hair, leaned forward. "Natalie, there's been talk online about tension between you and your family during the early years of Aurora. How do you respond to that?" Khloe's smile didn't falter, but her hand tightened on her chair. I could feel the tension humming. I looked straight into the camera. Tension was part of it, sure. But I don't hold grudges. Sometimes silence is the best response to disbelief. The host nodded approvingly. Khloe added quickly, "And that's why I've always encouraged Natalie to dream big, even when it seemed impossible." I turned to her. "Encouraged me." The words slipped out before I could stop them. She blinked, her smile stiffening. "Of course. I mean, I might have teased you a little, but sisters do that." The crew chuckled awkwardly. I forced a smile, but inside my pulse thundered. I could see what she was doing, rewriting history while the cameras rolled. After the taping, she pulled me aside. "You didn't have to make that face when I said I encouraged you," she hissed. "You looked petty." "I looked honest," I said. "There's a difference." Her expression sharpened. "Don't ruin this for me, Natalie. This is national coverage. It helps you too." "Right," I said, voice calm. "Just like it helped me when you laughed about my job at your parties." She rolled her eyes. "Oh, please, that was years ago. Grow up." I took a step closer. "I did. That's the problem." For a long second, neither of us spoke. Then she turned on her heel and walked away, her heels clicking against the polished floor like applause meant for herself. The segment aired a week later, and of course it went viral. Not for the reasons Khloe expected. Viewers picked up on the tension, the cold politeness between us. One comment read, "You can tell which sister actually built something." Another said, That blonde one gives fake vibes. I didn't post or reply. I didn't need to. The internet had already seen what I'd spent years trying to prove. But Khloe wasn't done. 3 days later, I woke up to another email, this time from a journalist I didn't know. "We're doing a follow-up piece on your family dynamics and the Aurora story. Your sister mentioned you might be open to a joint interview. Can we confirm?" I called Khloe immediately. "Why are reporters reaching out about our family dynamics?" She laughed like it was nothing. "Relax, it's just PR. People love emotional stories." "Stories?" I snapped. "You're turning my life into clickbait." Her tone cooled. "You think Aurora makes you untouchable. Don't forget who's been cleaning up your image since the beginning. I helped shift public sympathy when everyone thought you were crazy." I froze. "You mean when you told everyone I was crazy?" There was silence. Then she said softly, "Careful, Natalie. You wouldn't want your investors to think you're unstable now, would you?" It was a threat, subtle but sharp. I hung up before my anger could find words. Eli found me pacing in the garage hours later. "What happened?" he asked. "She's trying to turn this into a narrative like I owe her my success." He frowned. "Then tell the truth. Let people see her for who she is." I shook my head. "Not yet. The truth doesn't need my help. It just needs time." He studied me quietly, then nodded. "That's your kind of revenge, huh? Let karma do the heavy lifting." I smiled faintly. Exactly. But part of me wondered if silence would be enough this time. Khloe had always been skilled at manipulation. And now, with the cameras on her side, she had a stage big enough to rewrite everything. That night I couldn't sleep. The city outside was wrapped in mist, streetlights glowing like distant beacons. I sat by the window thinking of my father's words again. Do something so others don't fall. I had spent years building something that could save strangers, yet somehow I was still trying to protect myself from the people who shared my blood. The next morning my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Articles. Headlines. Interviews. The Hayes sisters' family behind the billion-dollar dream. Khloe had spun the story completely. She was now the marketing strategist who guided her sister's vision to the spotlight. Eli stormed into the office with his phone raised. "She's taking credit for Aurora, I know," I said quietly. "What are you going to do?" I looked at the prototype on the table, its faint light reflecting on the wall. "What I always do. Build." He exhaled, frustrated. "You can't keep letting them do this to you." "Eli," I said, turning toward him, "the world's watching now. Truth has a funny way of surfacing when people start digging. She's building her own trap." He stared at me for a long moment. Then he smiled. "You're terrifying when you're calm," you know that. I laughed softly. "Good. Let her underestimate me again." Outside rain began to fall, soft at first, then heavier, drumming against the windows like a warning. I stood there listening. Every drop felt like a countdown, each beat closer to something inevitable, because deep down I knew what was coming next. Khloe had started a fire she couldn't control. And this time I wasn't the one who'd get burned. It started on a Monday, gray and quiet, the kind of morning that tricks you into thinking life is steady. I was halfway through reviewing Aurora's quarterly reports when my phone buzzed, first once, then again, until the vibration rattled across my desk. The notifications blurred together, headlines, tags, messages. And then I saw it. Aurora's CEO accused of betraying her family. Underneath was a glossy photo of Khloe, her face artfully lit, eyes wide with practiced sorrow. I clicked. The interview played automatically. Khloe's voice, soft and trembling, filled the room. "My sister used to be humble," she said, "but fame changes people. She turned her back on us, the very family that supported her." Her hand pressed dramatically to her chest. "I tried to help her with Aurora, but she cut me out completely. It's heartbreaking to see greed destroy what used to be love." My breath left me all at once. On screen, Khloe dabbed the corner of her eye with a tissue, the perfect image of the wounded sibling. The interviewer nodded sympathetically. "That must be difficult." especially now that she's one of the youngest billionaires in the country. Khloe gave a sad smile. Money's not everything. Some people forget that. I shut the laptop, but her voice lingered in the silence like a poison. Outside, the rain had started again, tapping against the window. I stared at my reflection in the glass. Same tired eyes, same calm face, but everything inside me was burning. Eli walked in holding 2 coffees, stopped cold when he saw my expression. "What happened? Turn on your phone," I said. He did. Within seconds, his jaw tightened. "Oh my God, she didn't, she did." The video had already hit every major platform. Within hours, hashtags bloomed like weeds: number Aurora greed, number family betrayal, number the fallen sister. People who had never met me were dissecting my life, my choices, my silence. By noon, one investor had called to reassure me that it was probably just a misunderstanding. Another postponed a meeting indefinitely. The comments were worse. Typical CEO money over family. Bet the golden sister built the real company. Women like her give power a bad name. Each one felt like a small cut, but I didn't bleed. Not yet. Eli slammed his phone down. "We have to respond. This is defamation. We'll hold a press conference, show receipts, tell the truth." "No," I said quietly. He blinked. What I said, no. I picked up my coffee, now cold, and stared at the steam that wasn't there. "Let them talk. Nat, the longer you stay silent, the more people will believe her." I looked up. "Silence built this company, Eli. I won't abandon it now." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing. "You're impossible, maybe," I said. "But I'm not impulsive." By evening, the headlines had multiplied. Khloe appeared again on a live stream, now joined by my mother. Seeing them together was almost too much to process. My mother sat beside her, hands folded neatly, her tone controlled but pointed. "I just wish Natalie would remember where she came from," she said. "We always taught her family comes first." The audience applauded. I turned off the TV. The silence afterward felt like a vacuum. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something, but instead I stood still, forcing myself to breathe until my pulse slowed. My father's voice echoed in memory. "Energy belongs to those who dare." Maybe that meant daring to hold still when the world demanded reaction. At midnight, I drafted a statement but didn't send it. Instead, I opened Hannah Pierce's letter again. "Because of you, my dad still has a chance." I read it aloud softly until the words stopped shaking. The next day, my inbox overflowed: journalists, tabloids, strangers offering sympathy, others offering exclusives. Every ping felt like a heartbeat I didn't want to hear. Eli refused to let it go. "We can't hide forever," he said. "If you won't speak, I will." I met his eyes. "If we fight fire with fire, we both burn." I'm not giving her that satisfaction. He sighed, defeated, but he didn't argue again. That week, Aurora's PR team called an emergency meeting. The conference room was tense, every screen flashing headlines. One of the younger analysts shifted nervously. "Public sentiment's turning fast. If this continues, we'll lose investor confidence." "I understand," I said. "So what's the plan?" "Do our jobs," I said simply. "We keep building, we let truth find its way." The analyst frowned, clearly unconvinced, but didn't press further. That night, I found myself driving aimlessly through the city. The streets glistened with rain, the red lights stretching long and soft across the asphalt. I ended up at the marina where the water lapped quietly against the docks. I sat there watching the dark waves, feeling something in me shift. Let them think I was weak. Let them laugh. They'd done it before. The next morning, I woke to another surprise. Aurora's official Twitter account had been tagged in a thread. A journalist had begun investigating Khloe's claims. "Something doesn't add up," he wrote. "Records show no business affiliation between Aurora Labs and Khloe Hayes' PR." I stared at the screen, then exhaled. The first crack in her story. By the end of the day, more followed. Screenshots of Khloe's agency pitching exclusive family stories. A leaked email showing my mother negotiating an appearance fee for that interview. The internet turned swift and merciless. The same accounts that called me greedy, were now calling me gracious. Turns out the betrayed sister was cashing checks from the drama. Karma doesn't knock its storms in uninvited. Eli barged into the garage, grinning for the first time in days. "You see this? They're tearing her apart." I nodded slowly. "I told you, fire burns itself out," he laughed, shaking his head. "You're terrifyingly calm about this." "Because I've been here before," I said. They laugh first, we laugh last. For the first time, the garage felt light again. We turned the music up, finished assembling a new prototype, and sent the results to our partners. I didn't mention Khloe again. 2 days later, she posted a public apology, or what passed for one. "I only wanted to share my side," she wrote. "I didn't expect people to twist my words." The comments were brutal. The sympathy she'd milked now turned into mockery. Mom stayed silent, but the absence of her defense spoke volumes. That weekend, I walked to the pier again. The rain had stopped, leaving the air clean and still. I thought of my father, of how he used to say storms were good for the earth, they cleared what didn't belong. Maybe this one had done the same for me. Back at the office, the Aurora team gathered for Monday's meeting. The mood was lighter. Investors had resumed contact. The press had shifted their narrative, the Hayes scandal, when lies meet legacy. Eli leaned over as the meeting ended. "You know, I think you just survived your first public assassination attempt." I smiled. "It's not the first time I've been buried. The trick is learning how to grow underground." He grinned. "That's dark. That's survival." Later that night, as I locked up, I glanced once more at Hannah's letter on the wall. The edges had curled even more, but the ink still held strong. I traced my fingers over the words, thinking of how fragile truth looked, until it stood in the light. They'd tried to humiliate me again. Instead, they handed me my proof. The rain started again outside, gentle this time, almost forgiving. I turned off the lights, the prototype's pulse still glowing faintly in the dark. It wasn't the applause I wanted, but it was peace. And peace, I'd learned, was the loudest victory of all. It was a quiet morning when the knock came. 3 slow raps on the glass door of my office, deliberate enough to sound like purpose. I looked up from my desk, expecting Eli or one of the engineers, but instead I saw a woman in a tan coat holding a leather folder. Her expression was calm, professional, but her eyes, those eyes held curiosity, not accusation. "Miss Hayes," she asked, stepping inside as I waved her in. "I'm Dana Wells, investigative journalist. I write for the Chronicle. I'd like to talk about your sister's story." My pulse stuttered. "If you're here for gossip, you're wasting your time." Dana smiled faintly. "I don't do gossip. I do evidence." Something in her tone made me pause. She opened the folder, sliding a few printed pages across my desk. They weren't headlines, they were emails. My mother's name in one line, Khloe's in another. Subject: Aurora trademark rights proposal. The content was clear as glass. They had tried to sell partial branding rights to a private investor under the claim of family ownership. I exhaled slowly, the air leaving my chest like a confession. "How did you get this?" I asked. "I have sources," she said. "But what matters is what you want to do with it. I'm running a piece. A fair one. I want your side, truth, not spin." For a long moment I just stared at her, weighing silence against exposure. "You'll tell it exactly as it happened." "I will," she promised. Then I nodded. "Okay, let's talk." We spoke for 2 hours. I told her everything: the years in the garage, the failures, the laughter I endured, the promise I made to my father. She listened carefully, her pen moving fast, but never breaking eye contact. When I finished, she closed the notebook softly. "You didn't build a company," she said. "You built faith." I didn't answer. I couldn't. When Dana left, I felt lighter than I had in months. Not triumphant, just relieved. The truth finally had a voice. 2 days later, the article hit. The Chronicle, inside Aurora Labs: How One Woman Built Hope from Humiliation. The headline alone stopped me cold. It wasn't just another story, it was the story. Photos of my garage days filled the page. My hands soldering circuits, The blinking prototype, the single note on my wall. Energy belongs to those who dare. The article detailed every rejection, every sacrifice, every lie told against me. And at the end, Dana wrote, Aurora Labs is not just a company, it's a mirror held up to resilience. By noon, the internet had turned upside down. The same feeds that had cheered my downfall were now screaming my defense. The number Justice for Natalie trended for hours. Comments poured in. Finally, someone told her story. The real innovator here. Karma never misses. I didn't post anything. I didn't have to. By evening, Khloe's name began trending too, but not kindly. Screenshots of her emails leaked. Threads revealed payment negotiations between her PR team and online tabloids. Someone found the clip of her crying on television and slowed it down frame by frame until the performance cracked. The next morning, the news cycle belonged to me again. This time not as a villain, but as the woman who kept quiet until the world found her truth. Eli burst into my office waving his phone. You're everywhere, CNBC just quoted The Chronicle. They called you the woman who turned silence into strategy. I laughed softly. That's one way to describe survival. He grinned. And Khloe will be fine, I said. People like her always find new mirrors. But even as I said it, I knew something had shifted. Later that afternoon, my mother called. I hesitated before answering, half ready for anger, but her voice was small, almost unfamiliar. Natalie, I saw the article. I'm sure you did, I said quietly. There was a long pause, then a sigh. I misjudged you. I thought practicality was protection. I didn't see you were building something stronger. I didn't know what to say. For once her words carried no edge, only regret. I was wrong, she continued. I only hope someday you'll forgive me. My throat tightened. You don't need my forgiveness, Mom. You just need to stop choosing the wrong people to believe in. She exhaled softly. I started too late. But I'm trying. We said goodbye without saying goodbye. The next morning I woke to a message from the Chronicle's editor, prepare for national coverage. CNN, Bloomberg, Forbes, they all picked it up. The phrase Aurora effect became shorthand for perseverance under pressure. Khloe, on the other hand, went dark. Her agency released a short statement blaming miscommunication. Sponsors pulled out. Within a week, her online store shuttered. Dana called me again a few days later. You know, she said, this piece isn't just about you. It's about what happens when truth outlasts spin. I smiled. Truth always does. It just needs patience, she chuckled, and a little courage. After the call, I walked outside into the Seattle wind. It carried the smell of rain and the promise of closure. I thought about the girl I was years ago, the one sitting in the dark with a broken prototype and a cracked voice whispering one more day. That girl wouldn't recognize this version of me, but she built her wire by wire. That afternoon, I received an invitation to speak at a global innovation summit. The subject line read, Turning Failure into Fuel. I stared at it for a long time before accepting. On the flight to San Francisco, I scrolled through my phone past the headlines, past the interviews until I reached one photo, my father standing in his workshop, holding the blueprint of his unfinished design. I smiled, pressing the screen. We made it, Dad, I whispered. The conference was held in a massive auditorium overlooking the bay. Rows of faces stared up at me as I took the stage. My palms were damp, my heart steady. I spent years chasing approval. I began trying to prove I wasn't a mistake. But sometimes the world doesn't need your explanations. It needs your endurance. The audience was silent. My sister once said I was wasting my life, I continued, and for a while I believed her. But dreams that survive humiliation aren't fragile, they're unstoppable. Applause rose, growing into thunder. I smiled not for pride, but for release. That night, as the plane carried me home, I looked out at the clouds glowing under the moonlight. Somewhere below, cities pulsed with life. Somewhere Khloe was facing hers. And somewhere my mother was probably rereading the article she once would have called nonsense. When I landed, the first message waiting on my phone wasn't from a journalist or an investor. It was from Hannah Pierce. "Congratulations. My dad's still walking every morning. He tells everyone he helped inspire the billion-dollar woman." I laughed through tears. Tell him he's right. That evening, I returned to the garage, not the real one, but the preserved part of it now displayed in Aurora's new headquarters. The old workbench, the broken soldering iron, even the cracked mug I used to drink from. It was all there behind glass. I stood in front of it for a long time, watching my reflection blend with my past. Then I whispered, "We did it without shouting, didn't we?" The hum of the lights answered back. Outside, the city glittered with December frost. Revenge had never been the plan. But justice, that had always been waiting. And now it was mine. The morning sun poured through the glass walls of Aurora's new headquarters, painting the polished floors in gold. The city stretched beyond my window, San Francisco bold and awake, breathing opportunity. A year ago, the garage had been my whole world. Now a skyline reflected my name. I stood in front of the mirror in my office, adjusting my blazer before the biggest meeting of my career. Eli was already waiting downstairs, rehearsing numbers one last time, probably tapping his foot like he always did when he was nervous. On the desk beside me lay a folder stamped with the words, "Metasphere Technologies, Global Partnership Agreement." The number inside still looked unreal. $3 billion. I took a breath and smiled. "Okay, Dad," I whispered. "Let's make this count." When I entered the boardroom, the air buzzed with anticipation. Representatives from Metasphere were seated around the long table, their suits sharp, their pens lined neatly beside identical water bottles. Cameras from financial media waited just outside. Eli gave me a small nod. "Ready as I'll ever be," I said. The CEO of Metasphere, a composed man in his 50s named Richard Hand, stood to greet me. "Miss Hayes," he said warmly. "Aurora's technology is revolutionary. We're honored to take this step forward with you." We shook hands as flashes from the photographers outside lit the glass walls. I thought of every rejection email, every sneer, every night soldering wires by myself in the cold. And now here I was, signing a deal that would take Aurora to every hospital and clinic across the globe. As the final signatures dried, applause filled the room. Eli exhaled audibly beside me. "That's it," he said, his grin wide. "You just changed healthcare." "Not just healthcare," I said softly. "Lives." Outside the boardroom, a crowd of reporters had gathered. I faced them with the same calm I'd learned through years of being doubted. One voice shouted over the rest, "Natalie, what does this deal mean for you personally?" I paused. "It means silence pays off," I said with a small smile. "You don't have to shout to be heard, you just have to keep building." The cameras clicked like rain on metal. I turned and walked back into the elevator, the hum of applause fading behind me. That evening, Aurora hosted a small celebration on the rooftop. The skyline shimmered under strings of golden lights. The air smelled of champagne and salt from the nearby bay. My team mingled, laughing freely for the first time in months. Eli approached, holding 2 glasses. "To Aurora," he said, handing me one. "And to the girl who turned silence into an empire." I clinked my glass against his. "To the garage that started it all." We drank quietly, the moment heavier than words. I looked up at the night sky. For once, the stars didn't feel so far away. But success always casts a shadow, and I could feel it stretching even now. The next morning, headlines declared Aurora Labs signs multi-billion deal. Interviews flooded in. My inbox was chaos. But among all the congratulations, one email stood out. From Khloe. The subject line read, "Please." I hesitated before opening it. "I know I don't deserve this," she wrote. "But I need to talk to you. Not about money. Not about business. Just you and me. Please." For a long time I stared at the screen. I could almost hear her voice again, the laughter, the venom, the soft apologies that always came too late. Eli found me there hours later, frozen. You're not seriously considering it, he said. I don't know, I admitted. Maybe I just need to see her to understand what all this really cost, he sighed. If you do, make sure it's for closure, not forgiveness. That evening, I met her at a quiet cafe near the water. She was already there, sitting by the window, a wool coat wrapped tight around her shoulders. The Khloe I remembered had always been polished, untouchable. This one looked human. When she saw me, her smile wavered. You came. I did. She gestured to the seat across from her. You look different, stronger. I am, I said simply. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The hum of the espresso machine filled the silence. Then she exhaled shakily. I lost everything, Nat. The brand deals, the partnership's gone. I tried to fix it, but once people turn on you, they don't turn back. I didn't respond. She leaned forward. I said things I shouldn't have. I thought if I could control the story, I could control how I felt about losing you. But it just made everything worse. Her voice cracked, and for the first time I saw something real flicker behind the practiced charm. I'm sorry, she whispered. I was jealous. You had purpose. I had applause. And when the applause stopped, I realized I had nothing. I looked at her, the sister who once made me feel small, who mocked me for chasing a childish dream. Now she sat trembling, stripped of all her armor. Jealousy's loud, I said quietly. But peace is louder. Tears filled her eyes. Can we ever start over? I wanted to say no, to walk away and let her live in the echo of what she'd done. But instead, I sighed. Starting over isn't about forgetting Khloe. It's about not needing the apology anymore. She nodded slowly, the truth landing heavier than either of us expected. You really did build something good, she said. Dad would be proud. I smiled faintly. He already is. When we stood to leave, she reached out and hugged me. It wasn't the warm embrace of forgiveness, it was something softer, uncertain, fragile. But it was a beginning. Later that night, I returned to my apartment overlooking the bay. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window. The city below glowed like circuitry, every light a heartbeat. Somewhere out there, Khloe was trying to rebuild. Somewhere else, Mom was probably watching the news, seeing the daughter she once dismissed being called a visionary. I took a long sip and smiled to myself. Not out of triumph, but relief. The next morning, I arrived at the office early. The team was already bustling, new contracts, new labs, new beginnings. But my focus wasn't on expansion, it was on legacy. I gathered everyone in the conference room and said, we're creating a foundation, scholarships for young women in engineering. We'll call it the Hayes Initiative. Eli raised an eyebrow. You're really doing it? Yes, I said. Because this story isn't just mine anymore. As they clapped, I caught my reflection in the glass wall. For a moment, I saw the younger me, the girl sitting in a cold garage soldering wires with blistered hands. She looked back at me proud. By evening, the media had caught wind of the foundation. Headlines shifted again. Billionaire CEO turns pain into purpose. That night, I stood alone on the balcony of my apartment, watching the waves crash against the rocks below. My phone buzzed with new messages, but I ignored them. The only sound I wanted was the rhythm of the ocean. Eli texted me once before midnight. Still awake? Always, I replied. A moment later, another text came. You did it, Nat. You proved them all wrong. I stared at the screen, then typed back, no, I proved myself right. When I set the phone down, the city was quiet. The lights flickered on the water, steady and endless. This was what victory felt like, not noise, not applause, but peace, earned one hard breath at a time. Tomorrow, the world would call it success. I knew better. It was justice. Winter rolled in quietly that year, the kind of cold that didn't bite but lingered, whispering through the glass like memory. I stood on the terrace of my new home in Santa Barbara overlooking the Pacific. The sky was the color of pale gold, and the waves below moved with slow, deliberate grace. It still felt unreal sometimes that this piece belonged to me. That after years of scraping by in a freezing garage, this was where I'd landed. Inside, sunlight pooled across the marble floor. The walls were lined with framed letters from patients' families and doctors around the world. They called them Aurora stories. I never hung awards or magazine covers, just those letters. One from a grandmother in Oregon. Because of your technology, I can dance with my grandson again. Another from a young man in Spain. Your work saved my mother's life. They were proof that Aurora wasn't just a company, it was a promise fulfilled. That morning, I was preparing for a meeting with the foundation board when my mother arrived. I hadn't seen her in nearly a year. She stepped out of the car, slowly clutching a small gift bag. Her hair was streaked with silver now, her movements careful, almost timid. "Natalie," she said softly when she saw me, her voice carrying a kind of tremor I didn't recognize. "Mom," I said, stepping forward. "You found the place." Her eyes swept across the house, the ocean behind it, and then back to me. "It's beautiful," she said. "Peaceful. You always loved the sea." I did. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she handed me the bag. Inside was an old photograph, me at 10 years old, standing in the driveway beside my father's workbench, holding a tangle of wires and grinning proudly. Behind us, he had one hand on my shoulder, laughing. "I found it when I was cleaning out the attic," she said. "He always said you saw the world differently." I think I finally understand what he meant. My throat tightened. "Thank you." She hesitated, then looked out toward the water. "I read your interviews," she said quietly. "About the foundation, the partnership, everything. I'm proud of you, Natalie, truly proud." For years I'd imagined hearing those words, but now that they were here, they didn't ignite triumph. They brought something gentler, closure. I smiled faintly. "I'm glad you came." She nodded, her eyes glistening. "I just wish I'd believed in you sooner." "You can believe in me now," I said. "That's enough." We stood in silence, the sound of the waves filling the space between us. Then she exhaled, shaky but sincere. "Khloe told me she's working again. Small projects, consulting. She's trying to start over." "I know," I said. "She called last week." A shadow passed over my mother's face. "She's not well, not emotionally. I think she's realizing what she lost." I looked toward the horizon. Some lessons have to be learned in silence. Mom nodded slowly, as if she understood. When she left later that afternoon, she hugged me tightly. "You've done more than I ever dreamed possible," she whispered. "I hope you'll forgive the woman I used to be." "I already did," I said. That night, the house was quiet again. The sky outside was streaked with silver clouds, the ocean turning black under the moon. I sat by the fireplace with a cup of tea and thought about the strange symmetry of it all. Once I'd built in the dark, waiting for the world to notice. Now I built in the light, and the world was still watching, but this time it wasn't to laugh. The next day, I received a letter addressed by hand, no return address, just my name. I opened it carefully. The handwriting was shaky, but familiar. "Natalie, I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted to say thank you for meeting me, for not hating me, for letting me start again. I don't know what peace feels like yet, but I'm trying to find it. You once said silence is strength. I'm learning that now. Love, Khloe." I read it twice, then folded it gently and placed it beside the others on my wall. The edges fluttered in the ocean breeze from the open window. For the first time, I didn't feel anger when I thought of her. Only a quiet kind of empathy. Later that week, the Hayes Foundation launched its first scholarship recipients. We hosted the event in Aurora's atrium, a vast space of glass and light filled with young engineers, dreamers, and innovators. I walked onto the stage, the applause washing over me like a tide. I spoke about the power of failure, about how dreams aren't born in applause but in defiance. I was called naive, I said. I was told I was wasting my time, that ambition was arrogance. But I learned something important. When people laugh at your vision, it means they're too afraid to see it clearly. The crowd was silent, listening. "And if you ever doubt yourself," I added, "remember that every innovation starts as someone's foolish idea. Be foolish. Be relentless." Afterward, a young woman approached me, maybe 22, nervous but glowing. "Miss Hayes," she said, "your story, It saved me. I was about to give up on my project, but now I think maybe it's worth trying again. I smiled and took her hand. It always is. When the event ended, Eli found me near the stairs, a glass of sparkling water in his hand. You realize he said you've become the person you needed when you started. I laughed softly. Maybe that's the real success story. He raised his glass. To building what others can stand on. We clinked glasses, and I looked around at the crowd. Students, engineers, investors, families, all gathered under one roof, built from everything I once dreamed in secret. The noise of laughter and conversation echoed off the walls, alive and bright. After the event, I stayed behind walking the empty halls. Aurora's symbol, a soft blue pulse of light, glowed faintly on the glass doors. I touched it as I passed, a gesture of gratitude. Every hum of the building felt like the echo of the garage that birthed it. When I stepped outside, the air was cool and fragrant with salt. The parking lot was empty except for one car, the same old sedan my father used to drive, now long gone but vivid in memory. I imagined him standing there, hands in his pockets, smiling that quiet, proud smile. "You kept your promise," I whispered. The wind stirred, carrying the scent of the ocean through my hair. For once, the world felt still, complete. That night back home, I sat on the balcony watching the waves roll in under the stars. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear music drifting from another house, soft jazz, easy and slow. My phone buzzed once. A message from Eli. "You, okay, better than okay," I wrote back. "I'm free." The reply came a minute later. "You always were, Nat. You just had to remember." I smiled and put the phone down. The sea was endless, the horizon faintly silver under the moonlight. I thought of the younger me again, the girl with dirt under her nails and a heart too big for her circumstances. I wanted to tell her it all worked out, that she didn't need to scream for validation. That one day silence would be her victory song. The clock struck midnight, marking a new year on the calendar. Somewhere, fireworks flared faintly over the city. I didn't move. I just closed my eyes, breathing in the salt air, letting the sound of the waves drown everything else. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had something to prove. For the first time, I simply was. It's strange how peace can feel louder than applause. A year had passed since the foundation launch, and life had finally slowed to a rhythm that didn't demand survival. Mornings began with the sound of waves against the rocks below my home, the same ocean I once stared at as a child, dreaming of escape. Now it wasn't escape I wanted, it was stillness. I sat on the porch with a mug of coffee, watching sunlight dance across the Pacific. My laptop was open beside me, a half-finished letter glowing on the screen. It wasn't for investors or press, it was for me, for the girl I used to be, the one who thought being invisible meant being worthless. The words came slowly. "You were never small. You were just surrounded by people who couldn't see big things until they were finished." The soft chime of my phone broke the quiet. A text from Eli. "You ready for tonight?" I smiled. Tonight was Aurora's 10-year anniversary gala, a celebration of the company that had once been mocked as a trash job. The event would be live-streamed, globally hosted at the new research wing named after my father, the Thomas Hayes Innovation Center. I closed the laptop and looked out toward the horizon, the air shimmering with heat. "Yeah," I murmured. "I'm ready." By sunset, the building glowed like a jewel against the fading sky. Guests filled the courtyard, glasses of champagne glinting under string lights. Reporters lingered near the entrance, whispering about the woman who turned humiliation into legacy. I walked in quietly, not wanting a grand entrance. I'd had enough noise in this lifetime. Inside, a video looped on a massive screen, old photos from the garage, footage of the early prototypes, the first hospital tests. My younger self appeared for a moment, hair tied back, eyes fierce despite exhaustion. The crowd applauded. I felt a lump rise in my throat. Eli appeared beside me, straightening his tie. "They love it," he said. "You okay?" "I'm fine," I said, just remembering what it cost. He nodded. "Worth it," I thought for a moment, then smiled. Every bruise. After the dinner, I took the stage. The lights were warm on my face, the murmurs fading as the room settled into silence. I looked at the sea of faces, engineers, investors, families, students, and felt the weight of the moment pressed gently on my chest. I used to think revenge was the goal I began, that proving people wrong would be enough. But standing here tonight, I realized something else. It was never about them. It was about becoming the person who didn't need their approval anymore. The room was still, the kind of stillness that listens. When I started Aurora, all I had was a promise to my father to build something that would keep others from falling. What I didn't know then was that every failure, every laugh, every betrayal was shaping me to keep that promise. Applause rippled softly through the room, rising like a wave. I let it fade before continuing. People ask me what success feels like. I said, it feels like sitting in silence after years of noise. It feels like peace that no one can take from you. When I stepped off the stage, the applause followed me out into the courtyard. The night air was cool, scented with jasmine and salt. I stood by the railing looking down at the sea of lights below. That's when I saw her, Khloe. She was standing near the edge of the crowd, hesitant, half in shadow. Our eyes met across the courtyard. She lifted a hand, uncertain, almost asking permission to approach. I nodded once. She crossed the distance, slowly, her heels clicking against the stone. You were incredible, she said, voice low. I almost didn't come. I'm glad you did, I said. For a long moment we stood in silence. Then she looked toward the horizon. You really did it, Nat. You built something that matters. I smiled. So can you if you stop trying to fix the past and start building something new. She nodded. I'm trying. The wind lifted strands of her hair. For the first time in years, her face wasn't hiding behind a mask. It was just human. I wanted to thank you, she said softly, for not destroying me when you could have. I didn't need to, I said. Life handled that for both of us. She laughed, a small, honest sound. You always were the quiet one. And you always needed an audience, I said. Her smile faltered for a second, then returned, humble this time. Maybe that's why we needed each other. We stood there, not as rivals, not even as sisters, trying to make peace, just two women who had finally stopped running from their reflections. When she left later that night, I didn't feel anger or triumph. Only gratitude that the war between us was finally over. After the gala, I drove down to the beach. The air smelled of salt and cedar, the moon slicing silver paths across the water. I took off my heels and walked along the sand, the cold waves licking at my ankles. I thought about the journey, the Christmas dinner where I'd first swallowed my pride, the long nights soldering circuits, the betrayals, the headlines, the silence that became my armor. Every scar had led me here. Every humiliation had been a stepping stone. When I reached the end of the pier, I sat down, the wood damp beneath me, and pulled out my phone. Messages flooded the screen, congratulations, praise, media requests, but one caught my eye. It was from Hannah Pierce, the first woman who'd ever written to thank me. Dear Natalie, Dad's still walking every morning. He says Aurora gave him his second life, but I think you gave him his first real chance. We'll never forget what you did. Congratulations on everything, you deserve all of it. Tears blurred the screen. I looked out at the dark horizon, whispering into the wind. That's all I ever wanted. I stayed there until the stars thickened overhead. Somewhere in the distance I could hear the faint sound of laughter drifting from the gala. But I didn't go back. I didn't need to. The noise was for them. The peace was for me. As the tide came in, I whispered one last thought to the sea. You were right, Dad. Energy belongs to those who dare. And I finally understood what he meant. Because daring hadn't just built a company, it had built me. The waves rose and fell steady and eternal. I closed my eyes and let the sound wash through me. Tomorrow would bring headlines, meetings, and expectations. But tonight I had everything that mattered. The ocean, the stars, the quiet. I smiled, whispering into the wind, to every woman who's ever been told her dream was foolish, keep going. Let them laugh. One day your silence will be the loudest sound they've ever heard. The surf broke against the rocks, scattering silver spray into the night. I stood, brushed the sand from my hands, and walked back toward the lights of the city heart. Steady footsteps, sure. And as the wind carried the scent of salt and victory behind me, I knew this wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of something even greater. Something that didn't need revenge to shine. Just truth, just peace, just me. If you've ever had someone doubt you or laugh at what you believed in, tell me your story. I'd love to hear it. Maybe your silence will change the world too. And if it does, promise me one thing: don't forget to breathe when you finally win.